the introduction. I'm not. Welcome to everyone. It's great to see so many people here for this seminar. We will be recording it so we can share it with more people. The first part of the speakers and the panelists will be doing as a podcast. So if you're concerned about and if you don't want your face seen or you want your name changed, then you might want to do that. Or obviously, if there's any issues afterwards, please contact us. There's also going to be a report, a written report as well, full of resources and everything from tonight's meeting. And it looks from the people who are here that there's loads of different groups and loads of potential resources that we can share with people. I'm going to do a short presentation on the People's Land Policy, since we're organizing it. And the People's Land Policy is aiming for land reform from the ground up. That means we don't see ourselves as a sort of a think tank or who are coming up with a set of policies which we will then cascade down to everyone else. It's more of an issue of bringing people together to discuss why land is important and together developing ideas for change. And then all together trying to work towards building a movement for land justice. And in our last seminar, we talked about why land was important. And this was a quote from someone in the seminar. It says, "We cannot resolve any of the crises facing us without dealing with the land issue." And the kind of crises we're facing are food, the one we're obviously talking about today, but they're also environmental. There's housing crisis, community resources, which are being continually undermined. The problem with green and open spaces, not enough for everyone to have access to. So there's a number of crises that we're struggling against. So what's the land issue and how does it relate? Well, the land issue is how is land used? Who gets to decide how it's used? Who has access to the land and who benefits? This is what we mean by the land issue. And the problem is the current system is based on injustice and great inequality. And because of this, this contributes to injustice and inequality in other parts of society. So this seminar series is Land and Food, Social Justice and Ecological Responsibility. Food is a particularly important area for when we're looking at land reform. Over 70% of land in the UK is used for agriculture, less in Scotland, but very high in England and Northern Ireland. Also, it's important because we are all eaters, as someone said at the Oxford Real Farming Conference. Everyone is implicated. Everyone is affected by issues to do with food. And it impacts on everything. How land is used impacts on all these different issues: environment, economic and social justice, our way of life, and people's livelihood. Seminar 1, we looked at the Agricultural Act. There might be some positive features for the environment, but we felt it was largely inadequate for promoting and rewarding small-scale agroecological farming and good quality, affordable food. Certainly inadequate for dealing with issues that we're going to talk about tonight. Campaigners like the Land Workers Alliance are working hard to change this, but obviously I don't think anyone is holding their breath as to how much this government is going to be helping small farmers. The second seminar was Land and Food in the UK, and we looked at how concentrated land ownership is and how it's dominated by large agribusiness. And this has made it very difficult for small ecological farms to survive. Horticulture, the growing of fruit and veg, we were told that it's roughly 5% of total agricultural land, which is nothing. It really is very small. And instead we import so-called cheap food from abroad. But this cheap food is, of course, relies on cheap labor. And basically that's another word for very extremely exploited labor. It's very difficult for new entrants to get access to land, especially for those outside traditional farming backgrounds. And we heard about how difficult becoming a farmer is. We shared, one person's very long and difficult journey from how to be in the process of becoming a farmer. And it seemed that we were in desperate need for some systemic change. Tonight's seminar is really looking at how can urban and peri-urban farming contribute to the transformation of this food system. So what is needed to ensure that these forms of food production flourish and bring food justice to all? And we have a number of speakers who will have a lot to say about these issues. They'll be introduced in due course. I'm only starting out by introducing our first speakers, which is Fiona from Capital Growth and Rob from Fringe Farming. Both are from Sustain. They're going to give an introductory talk to some of the key issues we're facing, and then we're going to move on to the panelists. Here's a list of our panelists here, but we'll introduce them a bit more fully later. So if I could hand over then to, I think, Fiona, are you going first or is it Rob?
I am indeed. Thank you, Bonnie. If I can just have a wave to make sure you can hear me and see my screen. Is that working okay? Fantastic. Thank you, Bonnie. It's really interesting to hear about the two seminars that have come before this one, and also more about the People's Land Policy. And thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here for what feels like a really important and timely discussion about urban and peri-urban food growing. Like Bonnie said, I'm Fee. I coordinate Capital Growth, which is part of the food and farming charity Sustain. Before we hear from the great panelists that Bonnie's just mentioned tonight, myself and Rob, also from Sustain, are going to introduce the work that we do to support urban food growing. So hopefully we can help to set the scene and the bigger picture for you before hearing from the people who are doing the real work, and launching into tonight's discussion about where land access and land justice comes into it all. So I plan to cover our food growing network here in London, and also why urban food growing is such a great thing, why it's become so popular, the impact the pandemic has had, and how urban food growing communities have responded to the crisis. But I'll also touch on some of the barriers and challenges that we've noticed, including how they relate to land. And then Rob will introduce the work he's doing to bring agroecological food production to the urban fringe of our cities. And he can provide us with the bigger picture and the really exciting potential there. So I guess it's oops, is that working? For some reason my slides are not moving. Okay. Yeah, let's start by just, establishing what we mean when we talk about urban food growing. We're talking about a mosaic or a patchwork of green space used by communities to grow food. Such as gardens, community gardens, larger growing spaces like allotments, and then bigger market gardens and fringe farms. So some of these are really grassroots, led by volunteers in the community. Others are part of city farms or projects that receive funding and pay staff. And then we have our market gardens or urban farms that occupy bigger spaces, often, like I said, on the fringes of our cities, and connecting urban with rural, and growing and trading and employing people and providing people with fresh produce on their doorstep. I'll just say a few words about Capital Growth. We're a food growing network in the capital. We help Londoners who want to grow their own food across all the different patches of green space I've just referred to. And we do this in a variety of ways. We offer a map and database tool for growers to access and use. We deliver food growing training. Every year we run volunteering and network events. We offer signposting for funding and jobs, and we create spaces for grassroots activity like our upcoming national Good to Grow weekend. We generally want growers and growing projects to feel connected and be part of something bigger by joining our network. And of course, a lot of our job is also about promoting more widely the importance of urban food growing. So these graphics on the left show some of our original achievements, but since this time we've recently invited our 3,000th growing space into the network, So it's worth just, you know, asking ourselves why all this interest in growing food in our cities. And you probably know a lot of these, this already, but let's remind ourselves. So a lot of us live here in our cities, 83% in fact. It's really, really good for us. There's a lot of evidence, mounting evidence in fact, and if you haven't already, do check out our Growing Health project, which has kind of pulled together a lot of that evidence about food growing for our mental health, our physical health. It makes us feel better. And more recently, Sheffield University has also recently published some evidence about the mental health benefits, but also how it brings communities together and reconnects people with food. We've got a climate crisis going on, so urban food growing spaces offer some solutions here by increasing biodiversity and creating important wildlife corridors. There's a really interesting came across recently about the importance of community gardens in our cities for pollinating insects. Our damaging food system is really fragile and it relies so much on imports. And this last year, the pandemic, Brexit, has made it all the more urgent to look at how we create more resilient food supplies and diversify where and how we grow our food. And urban food growing offers the potential to scale up production as well as enhance food security. And I just mentioned on the slide here, opportunities for employment and local economy, and I'll let Rob maybe talk to that point a little bit more in a moment. It's also worth noting that there's been a big surge of interest in food growing. You know, we saw seed packets flying off the shelves at the beginning of the pandemic, allotment waiting lists, you know, increasing significantly, 300% in one council. And you know, for the last year, we've seen growers and spaces responding to the pandemic by pivoting a bit what they do and helping people stay connected and keep growing, as well as welcoming in new people who want to grow their own. And examples in London include organisations like Incredible Edible Lambeth, Women's Environment Network, Cordwainers in Hackney, to name just a few, who you know, were sending out seed packets to hunt into their networks. And people have been growing for their communities, identifying surplus produce or vacant space to grow on, often reaching the most vulnerable people in their communities who can benefit the most from fresh, healthy and affordable produce. Even when local guidance was really sketchy about whether community gardens could remain open, some growers continue to grow, mobilise themselves, scaled up production. Across our network, we've been supporting growers via our community harvest initiative, and I think some of you are in the room tonight. We've helped gardens connect up with mutual aid groups and such as food banks and other community groups, offering training, matching them up with mentors, offering the support and the seeds and materials along the way to produce that food and distribute it. And those gardens produced over 5 tons. And I think this just really scratches the surface of what's been happening in all of our cities up and down the country, and the potential for urban food growing to tackle major issues like poverty and to respond to food insecurity. And respond, you know, in a crisis. I'll also I think Rob may mention the amazing take-up with local veg schemes as well in a moment, but safe to say that people are really becoming aware of our long supply chains and the need to have more direct contact with growers, and fringe farmers have really seen this and met this increasing demand. Just a little point on the Community Harvest Initiative. We're going to be sharing those case studies of some of those amazing gardens in the coming weeks, so we're really excited about that. So look out for those, and also really excited about a series of events called Growing Resilience Through Food, which we'll be publishing all the information soon. But a lot of that learning has come out of our work with the Community Harvest Initiative. So hopefully we can inspire others. Those sessions are going to be on culturally appropriate food growing, engaging young people and connecting more with the local community as growing spaces. So I just want to touch on kind of opportunities and challenges as we see them. So I think I've kind of established with us tonight that lockdown has really reawakened our interest in food growing. At the same time, it's given us cause to reevaluate how important local urban green spaces are to us, including food growing spaces. We've seen some really good leadership coming from some councils. Sustain launched a report back in November called Response, Resilience and Recovery. I'll put the link in the chat in a moment. And we highlighted leadership on food growing and some of the good work, some of the really promising work going on there. And just coming back to, I mentioned Sheffield, the research project with Sheffield University. They also worked out that using only 10% of a city's urban green spaces and gardens could feed 15% of the population, and maybe that's not such a daft thing to aspire towards. But there are also significant roadblocks, and I've mentioned how we've valued green spaces and growing spaces through the pandemic, which I think everyone can agree with, but there are inequalities around who has access to these spaces, whether we're talking about home gardens or shared outdoor spaces or parks or community gardens. And there's a lot of work to be done around how community gardens start serving the whole community, and if they're not, why not, and who's got access to allotments, etc. In a survey we did a few months ago, for example, with community gardens, around 40% said that their growing activities didn't reflect fully the local community. And this leads to other challenges around perception of community food growing. And if you haven't had the chance, I'd urge you to find out a bit more about Tayshan Hayden-Smith's work with Grow to Know. He's doing some really inspiring work around what we need to do to change perceptions that community food growing isn't a white middle-class luxury hobby, and what we need to do to engage young people, and politicising urban food growing a bit more. And I'm excited to hear from Eileen a bit later about their new project, which is doing some really important work in this area. I've also mentioned, just at the bottom of that slide there, trying to make a living out of growing food and the housing crisis. So I'm just going to, before I hand over to Rob, I just kind of made a little list of some of the next steps and the action that's needed. This list could be much longer. I'm sure everyone here could add to it. We need to keep doing work within the movement, and also like policy and planning needs to kick in a bit more. We need to keep talking about how cool urban food growing is and why it's so important, and keep moving it up the agenda, joining up the dots with health initiatives, etc. We really need to work on not just access to land, but also protecting existing spaces. And at Sustain, we're going to be starting a project this spring around kind of food designation for community growing spaces, which I think is going to be really exciting, and we'll address some of those. And we've talked a little bit already about councils. They've got such a huge role to play in supporting urban agriculture as owners of land. Community gardens, they should be playing a role in our recovery plan. We know about how they contribute to community resilience and also emerging kind of contributions to food security, and of course also action on climate change. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to hand over to Rob. And Rob, you just let me know when you want me to move your slides. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, V. Do you want to give me a little thumbs up can you hear me? Anyone? Yeah. Okay, cool. Evening, everyone. Oh, I've lost the slides, Fiona. Oh yeah, great. All right, perfect. Right. So I'm gonna build on Fi's overview of urban agriculture with a little bit more about the edge of our cities, this kind of exciting, strategic place full of potential for jobs, livelihoods, fresh, culturally appropriate foods, education programs, kind of at the fringes of our cities. So if we go into the next slide. So is the next slide there? Or oh yeah, there we go. Okay. So in the time we have together, I'm going to kind of just briefly say what is these words? What is the peri-urban? A little bit about what agroecological farming or agroecology is in terms of farming approaches to this farming, and then why fringe farming? What are the benefits of fringe farming? And then kind of looking at highlighting access to land as a barrier and why Sustain is running this fringe farming collaboration this year and what we're doing. And then just kind of raising a few little nuggets that have emerged in the last 2 months to share with you in terms of, a people's land policy. So if we move on to the next slide, brilliant. So, so where is the peri-urban? It's quite blurry, really, isn't it? Because it's like the fringe, it's the edge of the city. In a recent report, I read that it could be defined like 10 kilometers beyond the city edge if you're thinking like geography or something. Interestingly, in the UK, there's some of the most fertile soils for growing food in the peri-urban, which is why it's a strategic place to be growing food for cities and communities. A lot of the land around cities are protected by the green belt and urban sprawl and the kind of destroying the rural nature and the benefits of biodiversity, which is why agroecology is so important, which we'll get onto. And then just kind of a historic note that around 50 years ago, there were a lot of market gardens around our cities that would provide the more perishable foods, especially into the cities. And these have kind of been lost, these businesses, in the last 50 years, partly due to supermarket monopolies, a lot of kind of centralized imports into the UK through a global food system. But we won't go into that too much tonight. That's another slideshow. So we move on to the next slide. Thanks, Fee. This is like intergalactic co-hosting or something. So the project I'm working on with Sustain Fringe Farming focuses on agroecology at the edge of the city, and I just wanted to, let's not throw words around without a little bit of just checking in. So the exciting thing about agroecology is it's a farming approach that integrates ecological and social principles in producing food with a broad aim of kind of having regenerative systems. When I say regenerative, I kind of mean working with natural cycles, emphasizing farmers' knowledge, and this might be ecological in the sense of there's no pesticides. But something that I notice sometimes in Europe especially is that the social elements of agroecology are not mentioned so much. There's an emphasis on the green. So, social elements like livelihoods for workers, deep democracy, equity, justice are all in the roots of agroecology in movements in Latin America. And so that's just something to be aware of how in Europe sometimes agroecology is quite co-opted into more scientific elements when actually its roots are in a kind of political movement. If we move on to the next slide. Okay. And I guess I felt that was important to mention because if we're talking about land justice and farming, then agroecology is a framework that kind of integrates ecological with justice elements. Anyway, so why fringe farming? Why should we do it? I mean, Fiona's mentioned some of the things in reference to urban agriculture, and I guess when I say fringe farming, I mean agroecology farming. But really, the exciting thing is about how fringe farming can connect the urban and the rural. in terms of, especially in terms of economies and building regional economies that integrate ecological and social elements. And this might be economic benefits with more contracts, services, products, and regional economies leading to jobs. It might be social in terms of community development and agroecological farms often run education programs. Last year, Sustain started about is agricultural land, mainly arable, so not growing food. And there's a lot, of like keeping horses on there and these kind of activities. And there was a calculation that if around 1% of the land around London that's currently growing cereals and grasses into vegetables, you could produce an extra 1 million kilograms of fruit and veggies. So if we move on to the next slide. So this is about really just highlighting, connecting the dots. So in the last year, there's been a rapid increase in demand for veg-bot schemes, fresh, ecological, culturally appropriate foods. And a lot of all the links in the references will be at the end of the presentation, but there was some research done to show that, there is a waiting list of nearly 7,000 people for one bot scheme in the UK this year. So you've got this demand, and then what do you do with it? Well, you've also got this new generation of growers and farmers that have been through different education programs, are ready to set up agroecological enterprises, but a key barrier to this is access to land. So it's kind of just being like, well, if you've got demand for food and you've got demand for land to grow food, what are you going to do with that? And so we have a project called Fringe Farming, which I will let you know about in the next slide. Thanks, Fiona. So the Fringe Farming Project is a collaboration across the UK with different partners, who you can see on the right-hand side, across different cities. And really the aim of this year's work is to kind of understand more deeply the barriers. We know that land access is a barrier. Is training also a barrier? Is getting the startup costs, is that a barrier? How could we link these things together to become opportunities for everyone? And then within particular cities, we'll be identifying land opportunities and developing local action plans, and then also developing a national policy. This is all with the kind of broad aim to support access to land, to increase access to land for agroecological farming, fringe farming, as part of an economic recovery from COVID and Brexit. So the cities involved will be Bristol, Glasgow, London and Sheffield. And also alongside this, the Land Workers Alliance are running a peri-urban practitioner forum to build farmer-to-farmer knowledge and also identify key issues. If you want to be involved in that forum and fill out the survey, the link will be at the end of the slideshow. So with the forum and then also the city-based work, will come out in 2022 with some national policy proposals around fringe farming, which perhaps we can connect in with the People's Land Policy. And then we're nearly there into the final slides. So the way that we're really focusing this year is not totally, but quite a lot on public land, to highlight to councils that agroecological farming with its multiple benefits can support meeting targets on whether it's Sheffield's commitment to a zero carbon city by 2030, or Bristol's one city approach and their education and economic targets, or in London's good growth objectives around creating a healthy city. Because with the multiple benefits, we can really, councils can really benefit from this in supporting opening up access to public land. And then I'll just move on to the final slide. And so some early reflections are, because the project's really been only going 7 weeks, is one of the issues raised was, what about this new green market and larger corporations coming into fringe farming, setting up like big warehouses and not having very good worker practices. So one of the things, like looking back into the roots of agroecology, is that to emphasize in fringe farming that we build food systems with the knowledge of people in that area. That's the root of how we build social systems and food systems. So really emphasizing the democratic nature of the organizations that get support for public land. And this could be like, I don't know if people know about community interest companies where there's democratic structures within them. And then a second issue that's come up is this issue of who you know, and kind of like opportunities with councils going to maybe larger urban agriculture organizations, and it not always being that fair. So thinking about, say councils were like, well, have some lands to do fringe farming, just thinking about how do we ensure that is equitable, how is that democratic, how is that just, all the basic principles of agroecology. So is that councils who might do that? Would they take lists of people interested, or give out lists of possible land, or is that a community organisation that acts as a kind of mediator between councils and community groups? The question is, what does that look like? And that's what we'll discuss more this year. Be interested if anyone has any thoughts of that. And then finally, the emerging council actions of what you can do if you work in a council and you want to support this is one, and we're finding that actually sometimes councils don't really know what assets they have. So it would be really great to transparently map them to enable equitable opportunities. Secondly, to champion some agroecology farms in the peri-urban areas with long-term leases. 3, to set up investment funds for green new jobs to support businesses to get up and running. Fourthly, procurement of regionally grown foods, so to enable contracts for new businesses to get viable, have jobs, have living wages, etc. And then fifthly, an idea being to also set up food hubs that can act as a kind of a regional distributor from the edges of cities, but also integrate training and education into those spaces. So that's it. I think that's just our email addresses if you want to say hello. Especially, it'd be great to get in contact about the Fringe Farming Project if you have any examples or case studies of councils working with community groups to set up community farms at the edge of cities. That would be amazing to hear about. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Right, thanks very much, Fee and Rob, for that. Setting us up for our panelists. So Alec is going to take over and introduce the panelists, and we're going to be asking them a few questions about their projects.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. So we're going to run a panel session now for about 40 minutes, where I'll just briefly introduce the panelists, but the first question will be really to allow them to introduce themselves more thoroughly. But we have Melina Barrett from Organic Lee. We have Arlene McKenzie from Roots into Growing. We have David Mwanaka, a maize farmer based in Enfield. Max Johnson from the Glasgow Community Food Network and director of the Wash House Garden. And Joe Payne from Manchester Urban Diggers and the Platfields Market Garden. So for this discussion, we really want to find out more about the panelists and the sort of projects they're involved with, but we're also really interested to understand your views on the relationship between land justice and food justice. How do we ensure growers are able to make a good living from their work, as well as ensuring that good quality food is accessible and affordable to all? How you work with your local communities, and what really needs to change to make peri-urban growing more of a phenomena. So if I was to start to just ask the panelists to talk about a little bit about themselves and the projects they're involved with. So Marlena, would you like to start by introducing yourself and your project?
Yeah, hello everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Great. Okay. I'm just going to share a few pictures if I can get this to work. Let's have a look. Let's see. Does that work? Yeah.
Yep.
So you might recognise this already because had it in his presentation. This is Corporate Nursery, and I recognise lots of faces on the screen who know it and have been there. So Organic Lee is named from the Lee Valley, and that's where we took the original inspiration. So we're 20 years old. Last month was the 20th birthday of the first spades in the ground. And the idea really was, looking back at the history of the Lee Valley, was known as the breadbasket of London. So those things Rob talked about the fringes of a city, being able to feed the city, the fertile river soil, the river as transport into London and down to the Thames on the River Lee. That was the inspiration for looking originally for land in this area, which is, the Lee Valley obviously straddles Waltham Forest, whole sections of North London, but we were given some allotment land, sort of unused allotment land in Chingford, and that's where Organic Lee started. And the idea really was to focus on the people as much as the plants, and the connections that food brings us in terms of the way that we work together, the way that we connect to the land, definitely having an agroecological approach, as Rob outlined, working with nature, working within nature, nourishing the soil, minimizing fossil fuel use, all of those things, and bringing that kind of people-centered, having a workers' co-op, our workers' cooperative at our core. So the idea of people doing things for themselves and for each other, and that idea also, I think, of lifelong learning. You talk to any grower and they say, like, you've never finished learning new things about how you're going to grow. So we started on a small allotment. It was like 6 allotment plots joined together, and it was all voluntary, people coming, taking home a share of the produce and learning together. And then I guess having established some sort of reputation and links particularly with Waltham Forest in the borough, when this site that you can see on the picture there, which is the council's former plant nursery, when we found out that was being closed down, we started to kind of think about having a lot more space and taking that on, and we talked to the council and they agreed to give us a lease. There are quite a lot of these glass houses around the edges of London, and some of them are already being put into this kind of use, like there's one in Dagenham that Growing Communities are working on. There's one in Haringey now that we've been involved in taking on and trying to support, definitely not wanting to be like in a kind of empire building sort of setup, and just wanting to support that to stay as food growing and to support the local community around it. And Arlene will talk a bit more about the way that we're trying to sort of support that as well, in terms of growers who are bringing their local community experience, but also like really focusing on how growing can become something that you do as a livelihood and can actually make a living from. So yeah, that's our sort of inspiration really. I mean, I'll talk more in the other questions about our kind of long-standing kind of peasant history and connection to the land in this country. That is what inspires us, and I think is what we need to look for going forward.
Great, thank you, Marlena. Arlene, would you like to go next and introduce yourself and talk about the work you do?
Yes, thank you, Alec. My name is Arlene. I work with Ubele, the Ubele Initiative, which is a Black-led, and I'm going to use, be like Rob, I'm going to use Black as in the political term. So it's led by people of color, looking at minority, marginalized people. That's our mission. We have been nominated as one of the infrastructure development group for London. So our motivation at Ubele is looking at the spaces that Black people hold now and in the past, and some of the things that have influenced that, and some of the changes that have made, and to try to work to build capacity, to work with our in an intergenerational way. It means we're working with the elders as well as the youngsters, as well as right across the board. We're looking at our tangible and intangible spaces. So we're looking at buildings, at farms in this instance, at our stories, and at how you sustain culture development, social development, and economic development, because this is primarily what we're doing. A little bit perhaps. So our involvement with the food movement is through a project called Roots into Food Growing. And this is a project that has evolved. It's a consortium, a partnership project, where we were very concerned about the fact that we know that Caribbean people came here, predominantly African, Caribbean, Asian, growing, knowing how to grow food. Food is, and to give a little bit of background, we are here because the British Empire was there. So in other words, most of the migrants that you see here are here because of the European incursion into South America, Africa, the Caribbean. And in the instance of the Caribbean and Latin America, certainly what we would call the Americas, is also because not only was land the thing that was captured, but also people. So people were brought into these regions to grow food. And so this is, I'm mentioning this as significant because Ubele's function has now been to say, so where are we? What are we doing in terms of our own cultural identity, our understanding of food, how we keep ourselves well, how do we understand our history in the context of the food growing? So our motivation and the Roots into Food Growing program, it's a 16-month funded program in partnership with Organically, with Land in Our Name Lion, who are conducting a major piece of research on which the moving forward will sit. We're looking at how we can recapture some of that space, how we can encourage our involvement, our understanding, identify where we are in terms of our own wellness to do with food and food preparation. The other entity that's involved, and perhaps we could say is a major inspiration, is a group of Black growers who are based up at Wolves Lane, and they have pulled together to create an organization called Black Roots, and they are growing food with a view, with support from Ubele, to creating an enterprise to look at how this can be sustainable. Just to go back a little bit, so a little bit about myself. I grew up here I was born in Jamaica, and I returned home for a period of time. And one of the interesting things is, I mean, if you talk about Jamaica, everybody would say Jamaica ginger, Jamaica cocoa, Jamaica coffee, sugarcane. It's an agricultural country. It's an island, and most of the Caribbean and South America, we have our crops, our food, plants, not just food, but also for spirituality. What is not known is a connection between the people and the spirit of the plants. I worked with a group of young people in establishing, and many of you may have heard of Rastafari, but Rastafari have been at the forefront of repatriating to Africa and seeking reparations for all that was lost. Now, in that reclamation of the land, this Caribbean and South American area is seen in people's minds as a tourism destination. And what has happened is a lot of land has now moved out of the hands of, so slavery was there. Slavery was founded on plantation economy. At the end of slavery, people were told to move off the land because the land belongs to the British Empire. And this is not just in Jamaica, the Caribbean, and so on. So all agricultural land, all good agricultural land, then reverted to the bigger farms, big farmers. So you get a lot of small farmers, subsistence farming, and people who were anxious to get away from the estates, they get their hands out the dirt. A mark of success is not growing. It's not growing food. Although there is a lot of respect given to growing food, because this is how people bought themselves out of slavery. This is how people move forward. So move forward to the migration now into the bigger European countries. And people will grow food, but it is still not culturally seen as a mark of moving forward if you're still working in the dirt, right? I'm trying to give a background, a profile, a sort of a understanding of what our community are facing. So while we know that many people came from India, from the Caribbean, from Africa, knowing and understanding, came from rural economies, understanding and respecting what the land can deliver. In the wider context of the bigger world, it is a difficult movement to look back and say, now we're going to return to the land. This is not a mark of moving forward. So in the Black Roots program, which is the Black Roots collective that are growers at Wolves Lane, these people have come together and are saying, now we're going to cultivate and make it into a business. The difficulty now is being able to re-energize that movement, that business side of how do we now make money out of what it is that we're doing. Ubeli has stepped in to work with Organically, who have all the knowledge and the technical know-how to be able to strengthen, build the capacity to say, look, this is something we can do. We're going to give you the support and it's going to happen. Not just at the Wolves Lane location, but we are trying to develop in working with the wider research, the growing in different parts of London as a beginning, and then hopefully to spread it out in This Is What Is Possible. So we're very excited about the Roots into Food program because it brings culture, it brings social grouping, it brings business management, it brings partnerships. There are a lot of elements at play here, and we're looking forward to working with the People's Land Policy to be able to identify land and with Sustain, because we're working, this is all evolving, this is new. And in this newness, we're just excited. We're glad it's happening. And on the call, I'm hoping that we have, there are lots of people people in our community, in the Black community, who are growing and who are very excited about the prospect of being able to now turn their what they know and the skills that they have to take it to the next level. So with regard to land and land access, I'm going to hand over to David. David came in at the last minute. I asked him because I think I know David has more experience and knowledge about getting access to land. I can't speak to it as eloquently as he can, but I hope that I've been able to explain to you the importance of how some of what Rob was saying, that for us, looking at, for us as Black people within, who are coming from this rural background and culture and so on, how important it is to revalue all aspects of food growing, from the food that we eat, of growing, the food that we eat, to the herbs. We have a lot of very important tea herbs, noni, and for agroforestry. I don't know if you know that Jamaica used to be one of the largest exporters of mahogany, of dyes, of scents, and now we don't. Now it's gone. So it's this knowledge and the opportunity to link what we're doing in the present to knowledge from the past, to stories. What are the food stories? What are the songs? Our agricultural past is so important that we want to reclaim some of that, revalue some of that, and to bring this into the context of our young people now in order to sustain their identity and their culture. So David, I'm going to pass over to you. I hope that was clear. It's an introduction.
Thanks, Ollie.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, my name is David Wilfred Mwanaka. I was born in Zimbabwe, and I came over to the UK sometime in the early 90s. And to me, when I was in Zimbabwe, I grew up eating white maize. Like most people who are not born in this country, whether born in Asia or in South America or wherever, in Africa, wherever, you grow up eating certain foods in that part of the world. But then when you come to the UK, you might discover that the food is either not there, or it could be there, but not as fresh as it was back home. So actually, in my case, I grew up eating white maize, but when I came to the UK, it simply wasn't available. It wasn't even known. But then, right at the back of my mind, I always this craving for something that I grew up eating in Zimbabwe. And for some reason, it wasn't known in the UK. And that's probably, I would say, that's my journey into farming. I think I started farming on a 100 farm or piece of land. I started farming because I had a passion for farming, because I had a passion for what I grew up eating. I wanted to eat it again. And I used to live in a flat in Tottenham, North London, and landlady. So one day I gave her some seed, maize seed, to grow for me in her garden, and because I didn't have a garden, I was on the top floor. So she did grow the maize seed for me, and then unfortunately, just before the maize actually matured, the lady passed on. So I actually couldn't go down to check how my maize was growing, and I left that flat. But then I had a bit of an understanding or a bit of knowledge that actually I could grow maize in the UK. And from then I started experimenting growing maize in the UK in my back garden. And it's actually from my back garden that I actually discovered I can grow something here. I can actually go on to be a commercial farmer in the country. Something that actually, when I left Zimbabwe, I never ever dreamt I would be a farmer in this country. I actually was a journalist in Zimbabwe. But it's from the fact that I had a passion for what I wanted to do. And on the other hand, like most people, you are employed and you probably don't like the job that you are doing, and you just feel you're wasting your time and you don't know where you're going. That was actually me. I would say I was one of those people who I could say I was just unemployable, because wherever I would go to work, I resigned after a few months, and also I never held any good jobs. So to me, it was just a matter of I won't lose anything if I go into farming. After all, I don't have a good job. So my journey into farming, after having experimented growing white maize in my back garden, was that I went around looking for land. That is, I would go around, drive around in the countryside, especially around London, knocking on some farmers' doors, asking them if they had a bit of land, or maybe something like 5 or 10 acres for me to start growing. And the answer I got was no. One reason is they just saw me as, they just couldn't believe that I was serious about farming. On the other hand, what is it that I'm going to farm? The farmers in this country know exactly what's supposed to be farmed in this country. But I was coming from a completely different culture altogether. And one big problem that you've got in this country when it comes to land ownership is that for most of the farmers in this country, the land was, or the land of the farm was passed down to them from that's maybe their father or their forefathers, and then whoever is farming right now, probably they actually never bought the farm. It's something that was passed down to them. But then if you are an outsider, it's more like you want to join the royal family. You are not part of them and you want to join them. If you don't belong to the farming community, it's so difficult to go in there, because really you know nobody in there. Whether you are white or black, it's difficult. I've got to be honest with you. So it's after some time, having gone around London knocking on some farmers' doors, and the answer was always no, no, no. I got to a point of thinking again, what's next? What can I do? And well, I did one stupid thing that was that helped me anyway. I placed an advert in a local newspaper. No, it wasn't actually, it was a London newspaper, a free newspaper, but that newspaper had nothing to do with farming. And from there, someone just called me because of because they saw that I wanted to grow white maize. They didn't know what white maize was. My name as well didn't sound like, didn't look like a name of a local farmer, David Wilfred Mwanaka, and that don't really add up in this country as a farmer. And as a result, you grow white maize, never heard of white maize, and why is it that you want to grow white maize? So I had an article in one of the newspapers, and it's from there that I had a few offers in London, all the way in Wales, Milton Keynes, and I eventually ended up in Enfield, that's North London. And yeah, even up to now, I would have to say, up to this very moment, I'm still looking for land. What I have is not enough. I've got more than 140 acres, but I'm still looking for land, and it's just as difficult as it was for me. Something like, I would have to say, right now, you are in my position 18 years ago. You got to start wherever you are. Whether you've got a garden, a small garden or whatever, you can actually start doing something. And one thing about farming is that it's so fulfilling when you grow something in your back garden, and then you and your family, you're actually enjoying. If you grow your own carrots, cabbages, or whatever it is, it's fulfilling when you've come to that point of harvesting what you've grown for yourself. And whatever you grow is way, way better than whatever you buy in the supermarkets. The stuff that you buy in the supermarkets, a lot of chemicals, is traveled from, we don't even know which part of the world it comes from. And by the time it gets into this country, maybe it's been on transit for a week or 2 weeks, it doesn't taste as good as what you grow in your back garden. So I would encourage everyone, whatever little space you've got, you can start from there. If you've got a conservatory, you can actually grow a few trees in a conservatory at the back of your house. You can actually grow some vegetables, all sorts of vegetables, and you and your family can actually start enjoying. And at the same time, it's educational as well to your children. We don't want to end up with children who have no idea where fruits or vegetables come from. Most of our children just assume it comes from Tesco, because if you say, go and you want some vegetables, where do you get the vegetables from? You get them from Tesco. So it's something that we are probably not aware of, that although we as adults might be in a position to know where fruit and veg come, the only food chain they know is Tesco, and you buy your food from Tesco and then you bring it home. If I were to give you one good example, is I used to live, that's in Essex. When I moved from Tilbury, right, I let my house to one lady there, and I had planted some after the lady moved in. I found out that she had chopped off most of the trees that were in the garden, except one tree, a plum tree, was still standing in front of the garden. And the juicy plums there, and they were actually on the ground. So I asked her, why are you not eating these plums? And she said, I don't know what they are. I said, where from? She said, Asda, because Asda is the supermarket that's nearest to where she lived. And I said, have you ever seen anything that looks like this from Asda? She said, yeah, probably. I said, what is it? She said, it's, yeah, I think it's they are plums. So I asked her, don't you think this is the plum that you buy in Asda? She said, yes, but the fact that I didn't buy it from the stores means probably shouldn't be eaten. But look here, it's the same thing that she buys from the stores. It's actually a lot tastier because it's grown naturally. But the fact that she's not buying from the shop, from the stores, is no good. That's the problem that we've got, that our children haven't got the slightest clue of where vegetables and where fruits come from, or even the milk that they have for breakfast every morning. Where does it come from? It all comes from the large supermarkets. It doesn't come from cows, but from large supermarkets. And this is something that we also need to teach our children. The more we start getting involved in growing food in our back gardens or in allotments, then our children also have the understanding of where food comes from. And again, when you look at what happened last year and still up to now, COVID-19 has taught us lessons about growing food, about food, where our food comes from. If we've got something worse than COVID-19 that affected the world, it probably would imply that we can't get the food that we usually get from other countries into the UK. And if that were to happen, just imagine what will happen to this country. We haven't got the slightest clue of how to use the back gardens that we already have. We have looked at the back gardens as empty spaces, as spaces that are supposed to be left bare as they are. But we actually, all of us can actually grow something in our back gardens. I always tell people that my back garden has got more than 80 fruit trees. I've got probably 80 to 100 fruit trees. And then if I were to tell people that, you assume it's a massive, massive garden, but it's just slightly bigger than an ordinary garden. But because I've managed to use the land that I have, I got enough land in my garden to do whatever I want, and I still have got my 80 plus fruit trees around the edge of the edges for my back garden. So it's a question of managing the little that you have before you think of getting an acre or 10 acres or 100 acres. Because when you tell people that you want to start farming, the first thing they think is, how much land do you have? Instead of, I can start with the little that I have, and I can change the world with the little that I have. And again, before I stop, there's one gentleman I know actually who started growing tables on, and he spoke to the manager. They said, no, I want to grow some salad here, and I believe I can grow them on top of your supermarket. And the manager agreed, and he started growing vegetables on top of a Sainsbury's supermarket. And from the top of Sainsbury's supermarket, you bring down his vegetables straight into the Sainsbury's stores and sell them in that very same store. So I think I have managed to encourage those who have an ambition to start farming, whether you've got the field or you don't, but start somewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. That was really inspirational, those stories. Could I move on to Max? Would you like to carry on and talk a little bit about the projects you're involved with?
Sure, thanks, Alec, and thanks for having me. So I'm from Glasgow Community Food Network, and I also represent the Wash House Garden. That's my day job. So I think I'll mostly talk about the Wash House Garden. So we started about 3 years ago now. We were just a couple of people who'd worked in community gardens around the city, around Glasgow, for a few years. And we'd kind of just realized how vulnerable those gardens are to funding and cuts of funding. So you can be running an incredible project one year, and then the next year funding gets cut, you know, you're on your knees. So we had also, both of us, kind of been out traveling as well around the world a little bit, and just been to cities and been to countries where organic food is way more kind of accepted, and yeah, it is much more of a norm. Yeah, and where market gardens were a bit bigger and a bit more established and a bit more part of the urban environment as well. So we basically we went chapping on doors, and we went to see a housing association, and they were the first people we asked, and they were like, yep, we've got this spare bit of land, hop on. So that's what we did, and we set up a market garden, and the idea was to be a community interest company or a social enterprise. So we can run community sessions, we can do education work, which we have been doing now for 3 years, but we can also sell fruit and vegetables we started doing it just to cafes and restaurants, which has gone really well. We're supplying a couple of Michelin star level places at the moment, but we're also doing a veg box for local people. So basically, yeah, there's nothing particularly remarkable about any of that, except that in Glasgow, we're one of 2 market gardens. And that's, when we set up, we were the only one in the city. So that shouldn't be exceptional by any stretch of the imagination, and yet it is. Yeah, so I don't really know where to start with that. But I mean, the good thing is, so the Glasgow Community Food Network are beginning to change that, and the City Council are beginning to change that. They're opening up land, or they say they're going to open up land. Whether they do or not is another issue. But the Community Food Network has a whole load of funding to start, essentially have these community activator posts in different areas of the city, and have green assemblies form to try and essentially form organizations that will take on land. And they also want to start up a kind of citywide food hub where you could go to learn how to be a grower. Because I don't know if the other growers on the call would kind of resonate with this, but if you want to learn how to be a veg grower, it's actually quite difficult to do that, and it's difficult to find proper courses. And if you want to not only learn how to grow, but grow as a business, there's virtually no information on that. And what information there is tends to be in Canada or the US, where these kind of, they're called bio-intensive agroecological farms are happening. So yeah, hopefully that will start to change. I really resonated with what Arlene was saying. I think I've always found it fascinating. In Scotland, people were chucked off their land in the Highland clearances, and they had a spiritual connection with that land. Celtic culture was, God was the land, and the land was God. And before that, the land was the gods. So people were chucked off that land that they've been on for hundreds and hundreds of years and driven into cities. And in cities, they completely lost that connection with the land, you know, year after year after year. And what we see in Glasgow is a city that is 100% post-industrial, 100% just robbed of that heritage of you know, being a peasant culture. So our diet is horrendous. I think Glasgow is quite famous for that. Our connection with the land is virtually non-existent, and that's what we as an organization want to change. Yeah, I think that's enough from me. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Max. And finally, Joe. Joe, would you like to talk a bit about yourself and your project?
Hi. Yeah, I'll just go back to how I got into growing. So I'm from Salford, which is in a city in Greater Manchester. There's like no markets, growing spaces. It's a very urban place to live. It's quite deprived. It's probably one of the most deprived areas in the northwest. And I have no background or family that was in farming or food growing or anything. And then I just got into it. I just was interested in it, but there was no obvious jobs in that sort of area. So me and my brother in 2016, when I was 26 and he was 24, did a course called Farm Start with the Kindling Trust, which was a commercial organic market gardening course, which cost us £500 each. We got a year-long course training in, and we got some organic land to grow on. And then from that, we wanted to grow our own food and do a veg box. And then from there, it sort of snowballed into a project now where we run over 10 different community food growing projects across Greater Manchester, including a rooftop garden with a very nice green Michelin star restaurant, and with links with a market garden out in the sort of peri-urban areas of Manchester. We've got we set up a community market garden in a really densely populated area of South Manchester on a public park, and we have some other projects, mainly community-based projects around. Yeah, basically what everyone else has said about, access to food, healthy food, green space. These are all just everything that's just sort of like been covered. Basically, is what we're about to. So yeah, we're still we're very new. We formed our CIC, a social enterprise community interest company, in May 2019. So, and we never run anything like it before. It's all brand new to us. Everything we're doing, we're learning as we're going, and we've made lots of mistakes. And yeah, so this is sort of a very new thing for us, and there's not any other sort of organisations in Manchester that are doing exactly what we're doing, but there's a lot of other community gardens, but we wanted to link together and kind of reduce the stress of running a community garden, by sort of having a central organisation that then went out and could do lots of stuff across lots of different projects. So that's kind of our angle.
Great, thank you, Jo. Thank you all for introducing yourself and giving us a really good taste of the sort of things you're involved with. I think we just wanted to ask one sort of general question about the relationship between land justice, food justice. You talked about access to land across many different dimensions, from the spiritual connection to the local economy connection. I'd be really interested to learn a bit more about that. I know at the beginning, Marlena, you mentioned that you would like to add a little bit more about your opinions regarding access to land and the work you do. And it'd be interesting to know that, particularly in relationship to the projects that you're doing together with Arlene as well. So would you like to talk a bit more about that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I think access to land and access to food just go hand in hand, really. I mean, we've heard from various speakers tonight about how the food system is broken, and I think we've talked about agroecology, but I think that let's also share the concept of food sovereignty, which is something that La Via Campesina came up with, which is the international union of small scale and peasant farmers. And let's remember that still most people in the world are fed by that kind of small scale farming. And I like what Raj Patel said about this, which is, if you talk about food security, you could have a dictatorship handing out McDonald's vouchers, and that would give everyone food security, but it wouldn't give them food sovereignty, which is the idea of communities being able to control the way that food is produced and traded and consumed, and putting people at the heart of our food systems and policies. So yeah, to grow real food, you need real land. And I suppose what we bring to our sort of, kind of the vision of organically was something that Max also mentioned about the history of the land rights in the UK, which I think then very much interweaves with the colonial history and what Arlene was talking about, and bringing those sort of two stories together of how people have been removed from that right to have land and to have common land and to share that land and to be nourished and connected to it. So I was just going to see if I can share, just if this is helpful. This is just a visual of something that we produced a while back. I know obviously you're not going to be able to see all of the text there, but the idea of it was that here's a sort of timeline, I'll just zoom in a bit, of some of the different things that have happened in terms of the UK's land history. And obviously there's all sorts of stories to happen elsewhere across the world as well. This isn't a complete picture, but that actually you've got two sides to this story. And one is on the left, where you've got this kind of idea of historical themes and processes where you've got enclosures and privatization and dispossession of land-based communities. So, you know, from in the like sort of 18th, 19th century, over sort of a 100-year period, there were 4,000 acts of parliament, and a sixth of Britain's land was privatized through those acts of parliament. So there's just been this kind of small-scale attrition at that point of taking land out of common use and privatizing it, and you know, people losing their grazing rights, that culture of exclusive ownership. You know, how many people are the 1% that own half the country now, and that sort of goes hand in hand with the way that our food system is controlled by huge corporations as well. So I think both of those things kind of come together, but then on the other side, there's this history of resistance as well, and this history of being very strong about what our connection is to the land, and whether that's, you know, the things that happened in this country in terms of the revolts here, but also, you know, slave uprisings and people kind of taking away from that. But I think, yeah, I think it's really interesting. Somebody put in the chat about, and Arlene also mentioned this idea of people kind of looking down on the idea of peasants. I mean, peasant becoming a kind of a sort of term of like a dirty word, and it you know, is that something where we can actually reclaim the idea that we all have this connection to the land and we can all work together, and that we all have that right. Yeah, so I guess that's on the sort of land side. I think this idea of common good land use is something that the group Shared Assets has worked. They've also worked with Land in Our Names and sort of looking at how, you know, because I guess that you know, there will be questions for people as well about, you know, where's the democracy? Should it be local authorities or should it be communities that control these things? So there's sort of some discussions to be had there. And I think I think it was probably Rob who also mentioned about now being the time kind of post-Brexit, as well as in terms of climate change, and you know, in terms of the way that our current farming system works, where the average age of farmers is over 60. You know, the land ownership is very dominated by the big farms, and increasingly those small farms are being lost across the world, but most heavily in the UK and in Europe, and you know, that's something that I think we need to try and challenge, really. Yeah, so the project that we're working on together with Arlene and with the Belly Initiative and with the Land in Our Names, yeah, definitely came out of that recognition that there's this huge cultural knowledge and bank of knowledge around food growing, and as Arlene said, not necessarily seen as something that you would go and it's like, well, that's going to be my career and that's going to be the thing I do. And we've been supporting things like the Farm Start Network. We've had a similar thing happening in London that was mentioned for Manchester about a farm Start program where my training, do I get some experience, get some land, and get started in food growing? And the reason for kind of for us for sort of like wanting to join together to do that was to sort of make sure that there's equitable access and that the barriers to being involved in that are recognised, so that we can actually work together more closely with the Abella Initiative to kind of, yeah, to like, I think especially it kind of became really clear at Wolves Lane as like, you know, the majority of the community around the site is not white British people, and yet if we're putting out a job advert for a farmer and for a grower on that site, and we're not getting people who've got the level 2 qualification and can get the job, then we're not, you know, we're doing something wrong with our process there, and we need to do something more creative to get through those barriers and to support new ways of finding the access to the land, but also that experience of being able to grow so that you can make a livelihood out of it, because that is different to pottering around on your allotment, you know, all the things that you need to know about crop planning and succession and harvesting and maximising your yield and all of those kind of things, as well as the business side of it and the marketing side and all of that. Just, you know, that's the training that we want to try and support.
Great, thank you, Marlena. Arlene, would you like to add anything else to that?
I think Marlena covered it completely, but I would just add one more thing. I think that with what David was saying that is really important is that with our communities, our Black communities, our communities of cultural differences, is that what you eat is different as well. So the the project at Wolves Lane is also growing a different kind of food as well, introducing and probably playing around and experimenting, as David said. I mean, white maize, and it's not homogeneous. I've never eaten white maize before, so, and I'm from the Caribbean, and David is African, our roots. We eat sweet corn, as I said. You know, I had to go into doing my research, but yet still he does not have hands to sell the white maize that he produces. So there is definitely a demand here within our communities of a need for specialist foods as well, to be able to sustain people's health and wellness and their cultural association and memory. You know, breadfruit, we chocho, things like this, that our people, every time you're traveling from the Caribbean, somebody is asking you to pack up your suitcase with this and that. But and this is because food is so important to our memory and our survival. So the project, the Roots into Food Growing project, hopefully will introduce, for want of a better word, that diversity of food into the food system, and also the way to cook it, the way to prepare it. These are things that through coexistence we get peace, you know, hopefully. So that food is also a way of getting peace and breaking down barriers. So there's also that aspect of it.
Oh, thank you, Arlene. I'm conscious about the time, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that want to ask a lot of questions to the panelists. So I think I'll just give the other panelists a moment if they wanted to respond to anything anybody else has said before we maybe open it up to public questions. I mean, Max, Joe, or David, did you want to add any other final comments before we open it up to the public? No? Okay. Oh, David, would you like to add something?
Yeah, no, I'm okay. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. Okay, in that case, David King, did you want to start opening up questions for the public?
Yeah, thanks, Alec. Yeah, there are a couple of questions already in the chat. The first one was from Barb. Is Barb there? You asked a practical question, I think it was, about like growing on in roofs and basements.
Yeah, no, we have like a massive flat roof here in central London. Not a whole lot of land to grow vegetables, and we have actually asked the council about growing vegetables on our roof, and they said it would be too heavy. because of the soil and the wet soil and stuff like that. So that got us thinking about chickens on the roof, because they'd be safe from foxes, and also bees. And I just was wondering if anyone had any experience trying to get their local council to allow them to put animals on the roof. Sorry, it just sounds a bit crazy, but I just,
not crazy at all. So
we've grown on.
Go on, Joe.
Sorry. We've got
Joe,
this one project on the roof, but it's a car park, so they've already sort of know that it can take the weight of cars, and I don't know if that's just the difference between a normal roof.
Okay. No, this is not a.
And then, obviously that makes a massive difference. But the other one is a car park as well, and they're saying the owners of that car park are saying that they can only take like a foot of soil, which is a really small amount. But I have seen a really cool project in London that's like hydroponic systems, so you don't need any soil, and therefore the weight is a lot less. So that might be another option.
Great. And do people have ideas about funding sources? Or I guess, well, I'll listen. I'll just look at the Sustain website and dig around. So thank you.
I wonder, Fiona and Rob, if you're still there, whether there are any examples that you know of people growing food on the roof or in the basement. Fiona, Rob, are you still there?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. Rob, do you know any? I mean, I know that Grow Up London have moved out of London. I mean, I'm not an expert on kind of vertical growing or growing in kind of more tech growing. But Rob, do you have any thoughts about signposting?
There was a former project called Food from the Sky, but I think that stopped, and it actually was on top of a supermarket in North London and then sold into the supermarket.
That's right, that was in Haringey, I think.
So if you Google Food from the Sky, and then more generally in New York there's some really good examples of rooftop gardening that also make a viable business plan through doing like weddings on top of there, so they can really pay people properly and things like that. So I think if you have a little search for New York rooftop gardens, you'll find some like interesting examples and stuff.
I would also add, I think your inclination with bees is a good one, because if you have the bees high up, then the flight path isn't directly into a crowd of people or whatever, so it's quite a good idea to go for bees, I think.
Yeah, no, there used to be a honey people who would help you do that here in London, and I don't know what's happened to them. There are still beekeepers in Hackney and other places, but there was like a specific rooftop beekeeping outfit, and they seem to have disappeared. So
yeah, what you can often do is just chat to a beekeeper and be like, "Do you want to put some hives on the roof?" And we'll just split. we'll just split the honey. I think quite a lot of the time they're up.
Yeah, but I was also just interested in animals, just sort of like if anybody, because I've been looking a lot at regenerative agriculture using animals, and as well as growing plants, and anyway, I'll dig around. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. There was also a question from Kerry Anna about working with councils. Kerry Anna, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. And Fiona from Sustain dropped me a private note as well about meeting with Hackney Council. So thank you very much for that, Fiona. But yeah, I've been trying to get a community garden set up on the council estate where I live in Hackney, and it's actually really frustrating. And although they have policies around how to do it, it is. But I mean, I work in project management for sustainability for a big broadcaster, And so that's sort of like my field of work. So I have the expertise, but I think, you know, it's very much led by the tenants and residents. And, you know, if you don't have that expertise, it's quite restrictive, I think, for a lot of people, you know, where it is very difficult to get the council engaged, you know, and I've been, you know, on at them for 7 months now consistently. And, you know, in the first instance, like me as a resident, I had to get a steering group of tenants together. And the council did have a bit in the fact that they put us in touch with Cordwainers Grow, who are running a micro grow project. So I worked with them to get the steering group together. So now we have a steering group. So we're kind of like doing everything our side, but getting the council to, I mean, it's taking them months to, you know, come and do a site evaluation and sort of trying to get out of them the information about, you know, what are the next steps for funding and, you know, how do you go about that? And it's all very much, I guess, on the onus of residents and tenants, who not everybody has a skill base in working with projects or project management to do. And, you know, for me, who works in that field, to still be going 7 months later to even try and get them to approve the land, which I literally see outside my window. You know, I could literally go down there and, you know, obviously, you know, put some raised beds down there myself. And, you know, are actually the tenants that are part of the steering groups were actually going to guerrilla garden on our council, on our estate in the meantime, because in the rose beds with companion planting, that's sort of like my next avenue for, you know, trying to get some stuff for, you know, the residents and tenants here who probably, you know, like need access to, you know, fresh fruit and vegetables more so than sort of maybe other, you know, other areas, people who live in houses and things like that all have gardens that have better access. But yeah, it's just, it is frustrating, and I don't, yeah, it's kind of like that access to land part of this discussion that you know, even though the councils do have policies around it, actually getting them to allow you to use the land seems to be really quite hard.
Can I was going to say, we work mainly with councils, and there's two ways that we've had, the two solutions to that from our experience is we've been literally told to ask for forgiveness, not permission, and then literally told to go and just do it by actual members of the like staff of the park. And I genuinely, you won't get it. Like, we're still waiting on a lease for the space that we have on the park, and we've been there for 4 years. So if we'd have been waiting now, if we would have still been waiting, you know, for permission, we wouldn't have done anything. And then the other way that we've managed to get in with the council is by going from working with really good chefs that are going to boost their economy, and that's what they care about. Like they've got this, if they can say that they've got this amazing restaurant that's growing food and the projects are there, then they can see that will directly impact their, you know, it'll look good for them. So we have got like an in straight away because the chefs have already got the in. So that's the route in to get in land. That's just from in Manchester and the Greater Manchester area. So it's kind of like linking up with organisations and groups that are already in with them and know the right people to talk to, and then like jumping on the back of that, which helps.
I guess.
Thank you. That's really useful to know. And yeah, that was kind of my point around guerrilla gardening and guerrilla planting. You know, just go ahead and do it and speak to the, you know, the estate gardeners and just say, please don't dig this up.
Yeah, I can't imagine they would. It'd be really mean.
Sorry, Max.
The other thing to, yeah, the other thing I was going to say is just housing associations, in my experience, have land, and for them it's a cost to maintain it. So I have found in the past that they've been quite receptive to giving it over, often free of charge. So I would definitely encourage people to look into their local housing associations and just go and talk to them.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, housing associations, but also I would say maybe shared assets might be a useful resource. They have got some resources on their website about how councils should be looking at making good use of land. And you've obviously got a whole set of different things that you can be saying to the council about why it's good to do this, from social reasons, climate change reasons, and all of that. But it does, yeah, it does just depend on the persistence, I think, or sometimes the luck of who you end up being friends with, I think, is often the way it works. Yeah.
Okay, I wonder with Fiona or Rob.
Helpful.
So Fiona or Rob, so whether Carianna's experience is typical or whether there are sort of progressive local authorities out there. Maybe not. Okay.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear what. Oh.
Go on.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear Carianna's experience, and I would say that it is there's lots of frustration about getting support from local councils, and it's something that we at Sustain feel like we need to do a lot of work around, and it's hard because I think there's lots of stumbling blocks. It's complicated to know who to get in touch with, and I think from the council's point of view, sometimes food growing is thought of as a bit of a specialist thing, and so they kind of leave it alone, or they don't know. It's very cross-cutting between different departments, which can be a real opportunity, but it's also a challenge because nobody really knows who's responsible for it. And then we've heard some stories just this morning actually about a project up north that have just been so frustrated at not being able to access land, despite the fact that they got quite far in the conversation, and we're promised access, and and then have been have had a fail at the end of the process. But I have put I think it is important that we celebrate the councils that are doing well, so that we kind of show the other ones up, if you like, almost, and kind of raise them up. So I think that's something that we're trying to kind of profile, those councils that are doing well and are being more creative and forward thinking about supporting food growing initiatives and all the different agendas that those food growing initiatives meet. And also we're looking at where councils are putting food growing into their strategies and their plans. So I have also put a link if anyone's interested in some of those case studies. And we're going to be taking that further. And I've just mentioned in the chat that we're running an event later in April, which will be for councils, but it will also be for community food growing initiatives and network organisations, so that we start to kind of bring that dialogue together a little bit more, and can inform councils on what they should be doing to support on a local level.
I just wanted to add that I also in the chat put a toolkit that the Community Food Growers Network produced a few years back, and it includes in there example letters, who to talk to in the council and stuff like that. So it's quite a handy little toolkit for some hot takes.
Thanks. Sorry, go ahead.
Don't forget the Greater London Authority if you're in London, as well as your local councils, because they've got this good growth fund, which Fiona mentioned in her this sort of good growth vision for London, and that includes, they've given funding for developments at our site and at Wolves Lane. And it's really exciting that they're sort of saying, well, that's their kind of flagship project into one of their because it's meeting mayoral priorities and stuff. So, we have to jump through lots of hoops to get our funding. But in terms of the actual support and the concept of we've sort of put it forward as this concept of a market garden city. So it's you've got one in Chingford, you can have one in Wood Green, and then there's one in Dagenham. Where else are we going to have all these market gardens across London? So it might be that you could look for support there as well.
Thanks everyone. I just got a message from Bonnie as well that's we're going to be collecting all of these resources, and so we can send them out. So don't forget to sign up to our mailing list if you're not subscribed. already. There was a question from Leslie, if you're there, Leslie, about changing the culture of food growing.
Yes, I just wanted, I mean, as much, I mean, land is obviously a huge issue, and that can't be denied. But there's also another big problem I think we have as food growers, which is that often it's seen as either a sort of hobby that people do when they get elderly, or something that people used to do years ago, or a peasant's work, which is backbreaking, repetitive, boring, carrying water for miles, and you have these sort of visions. And I think that's also, that has to be seen as part of the justice work, because to me the sort of propaganda, or this, hundreds of years people have been saying, the city is where it's at, it's really interesting, and not working with your hands is absolutely important. You should be working with your head all the time, as if they're separated, as if people sitting at computers are only doing head work, and people working the land, it's not creative, and it's not, you don't use your brains at all. I mean, it's just rubbish. But it's a really big piece of work, I think, to kind of change the narrative. And I was interested maybe in Arlene and David, and how you see that, particularly in this country, having a brighter perhaps view of how that relates. I mean, there's another story as well in this country, which is that you have to be sort of landed gentry to if you are a farmer, and that means you just boss other people around, really. You never get dirty yourself, sort of. So I think we need young people joining us, and all sorts of people. Have you got any ideas about how to change the narrative?
Arlena?
So that's what we're doing. We're working to change the narrative. We're introducing, revaluing the importance of land, and the importance of eating well, and of health, and of reintroducing. I mean, we've got the Black Roots team have a really good youth program, in that they go into schools, they introduce young people to it from an early age. I think getting our young people and families involved and showing the value of the land it's a long haul. It's not an easy one. There is the perception, of course, you're not successful if your hands are in the dirt. This is just something that we have to fight against. We have to revalue it. And that's the bottom line, whether it be from the peasantry in the rural areas to add the dimension of race into it, and you've got it even more. This is, let me get away from this, which has been historically a sign of downpression. So we're working at it. We're bringing in the volunteers. Marlena has a program where we're trying to bring in volunteers to Wolves Lane generally, and hoping and working at identifying and targeting more of young Black people to be volunteers in this area. Because it is also, we're moving into high unemployment, we're moving into young people who don't have, and all generations of people who through this COVID experience is now have to reassess what they're doing. So yes, it's a challenge. It's not going to be straightforward, but we are going to work at it, and we're going to reach out as far as possible to be able to show how wonderful this involvement is.
And David, did you want to come in there?
Personally, I think the councils can actually do a lot. Well, if I were to give an example, in Enfield, I know there's a farm that's been sitting there for years, and that nothing has been going on. And I've approached the council several times. I've written letters to them. I've actually written a letter to the MP, and they've just said, well, that farm is tenanted, but nothing is going on. But they're just not willing to let someone use that farm for something that's constructive, or let the community at least use that farm. And I also know maybe in some parts of the city, there could be some areas where the council has earmarked for housing development, and maybe they would want to build houses in the next 5 to 10 years. Before they actually build the houses, they could actually use that land for farm projects, because, well, that land is still going to be cleared and it's going to have houses anyway. So why not use the land right now for something else? When the time comes for them to build the houses, then they build the houses. But I think there's a lot of red tape, a lot of people in the councils not wanting to be responsible for anything, because maybe if something goes wrong 5 or 10 years down the line, I will be blamed for that. So I personally think the councils haven't been doing enough to help the situation that we have at the moment regarding land distribution.
Thank you. There was a question also, I think, from Marco about aligning growing with public procurement. Marco, are you there?
Yeah, I was it's fascinating listening to all the speakers this evening. Yeah, I was just wondering if there are any chances, or if anyone's had experience of like aligning public procurement. So like the councils must buy in a lot of meals for schools, for example. So are there ways to kind of look at through those routes to help unlock land and jobs to grow food locally?
Shall I kick off on that one?
Yeah, go on.
I think, I know that in Manchester there's been not public procurement, but like with the university, looking at how the university will buy food and in fact getting them to be part of a cooperative of producers and consumers along with other restaurants, so that actually you're having that kind of more equitable exchange. I think with the public procurement, I guess the two barriers to that, one is the scale of operation. When things have got to this scale of, rather than it being the individual school that you could have a direct relationship with, if it's kind of become this, like the whole borough's being supplied, then it's hard for the smaller groups to manage that. And then I guess the other one is just this problem we've got in our food system of the kind of big scale food production being very cheap, and it's very hard to kind of match those prices, and that's just part of this much bigger system. But I think there are some places, so like Manchester, there's, I think in Devon or Dorset, there's been like a school meals, so actually like it was the programme to cook the school meals rather than just provide the produce for them and make that sustainable. And there's also a programme called Ready Healthy Eat, which is looking at how ready meal provision for things like food banks can be more like proper decent quality food, rather than just sort of junk foods or other people's surpluses, and actually look at that quality. So that there's some things there, I think. And I think I just wanted to pick up also on the previous question about the how you change this culture. And I suppose one thing that really I've really seen when some of the people that have come through Organic Lee's progression routes and so on, and some of the people we've worked with, especially younger people we've worked with, is that the school system is so rigid and it so doesn't suit a lot of people, that actually if you can create exciting opportunities, there's a sense of freedom of being outside and working on the land, that actually you can kind of just give a completely different perspective to that sense of the toil and the kind of this is drudgery sort of thing. And we've definitely seen quite a number of people who've gone like, oh, this is actually really what I've always wanted to do, and I feel really at home with this. And then you're just kind of, it's just such a shift of our whole mindset and our whole kind of Western, as I said, like separation of mind and body and all of those sort of things. So there's just a lot to do about that. But I think as you move into an era where we've got to deal with our fossil fuel use, then you also look at the joy of people working together and how many people can just do the weeding and get it done, rather than a tractor driving around with one person, or not even a person now, it'll just be like a robot, So I think it's just trying to keep that that sense.
So you're saying the children are our future, Marlene. Max or Joe, did you want to come in on that, on the public procurement question?
I think it's the same as what the other ones were saying, that about it's actually being able to supply regularly a set amount of food for a large scale is actually really hard to do, and to guarantee that small scale. And so I think that's where the problem is, and I think you have to have a really connected network and really strong communication and organisation for that to actually work, for the scale of the sizes of organisations that can buy, or, that want to be, at hospital level or school level or whatever. So, yeah.
Thanks. We're going to have to wrap up soon, but there was a question from Bonnie, actually, which was about, is there, it's great to hear of all of these sort of projects, but are you linked up? Is there any sort of regional or national body that, you're linked up to that could develop or promote policy on your behalf? Or is there space for one?
I just think Arlene had her hand up first, that she wanted to respond to the last question.
Yeah, it's just a quick note. We've been having some meetings with a very interesting group who are working through the churches, and I think it was really an eye-opener in that conversation. In the journey was just looking at the land that churches have, and particularly with the African and the Caribbean communities, where the churches have got such an influence on what people do, families do, and usually the churches gatherings involve food and eating, and perhaps even putting money together to buy food. And putting money together was a new perspective. To grow food was an interesting partnership that we're looking at trying to nurture. So I just wanted to say that we can't ignore that, particularly for a lot of Black people who are involved within the mosques, within the churches, within our various communities. There's a lot of activity that's centered around faith and the land.
Thanks, Arlene. And thank all the speakers and participants. I'm just going to hand back to Bonnie now, who's going to wrap up and tell you about where we're going to go from here.
Well, it's a very difficult to wrap up. I think all of us are amazed at what we've heard tonight, and especially for some of us who aren't directly involved in any food growing whatsoever, to hear about all these projects and what's going on around the country is amazing. And I suppose the only one frustrating thing is that I feel that we need to have a massive movement, and it's happening all over the place. And this is, I suppose, one of my questions, but really all the people who are involved in wanting to change the food system, we really need to have this movement that can force change through. And part of it is going to be getting access to land, because at the moment is pretty much being monopolized by a few people, and everyone seems to be scrambling around for trying to fit into where there is land available. And when you think about it, there's probably loads of land that's available, but it's dominated by private owners, and we can't get access to it. So we really need to start pushing for gaining more land for people and less for profit, for private profit of these large agribusinesses and those housing developments, etc., etc. So thank you really to all the speakers, and people have put in loads of links, and there's a lot of things going on that people can look at and sign up to. In terms of our next seminar, which is the last one, I think you're going to find that it actually follows on quite nicely from this one. We're actually going to take a look at global food systems, partially, because obviously it's a huge topic. We can only deal with it to a certain extent, but we're going to look at how the general global capitalist food system works and its impact, in particular on farmers in the global south. And the thing is about that is we've got a speaker from Brazil who's going to talk about some of the things that are going on there. And what really I think is important is we have so much to learn about from what's going on there. That so much is happening. There's a whole loads of people are fighting to keep food systems that are working well, that are healthy, that are feeding people, but they're having to fight against global capitalist agriculture to maintain this. You know, they're having to resist land grabs. And so much is going on that one of the main themes is learning what we can learn here from what's going on there. And I think there's some very inspirational examples that we're going to hear from Brazil. And then we talked about exploitation in the food industry. Well, we've got a speaker who's going to talk about who actually spent 6 years working in a food processing factory in West London. And this is all very well, all these, you know, what the jobs that people are doing, but it's nothing compared to the employment of migrant workers, of factory assembly line workers in the food processing industry. And these people are going through hell. And really, we want to change the whole food system so we don't have to have, people don't have to be doing those sorts of jobs, that we're going to be producing food in different ways. And then leading on from what people were saying, that we're going to discuss about, well, what is the future? And our speaker is someone called Maize, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who actually wrote a book called Small Farm Future. And he's arguing very much for a return to the land. This has been one of the themes here. And not return to the land and say, oh, we're going back to some romantic past necessarily, but that more and more people, we're going to need more people on the land. And this isn't going backwards, it's going forward. And getting more and more people involved in growing and looking after the land, not just for food, but for the environment and everything like that. So we'll actually be considering, well, maybe we should be thinking about a return to the land. And it doesn't have to mean being backward, but actually being something that would be a really important step forward for all of us. So again, I think you can all join me in thanking all of our speakers. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything else, now that I've any last comments from any of our speakers, or any more advice or resources that we'd like to we could share with people. And if not, this recording will be available to listen to again. And also we'll be putting all these resources together, and hopefully people will be able to get involved in some way in all these exciting projects. So, thank you all.
Thank you.